Welcome to stream recap number 4 of our Seleucid DEI Rome 2 Total War playthrough. We began with an overview of our situation and held a discussion with the council about our next moves. Focusing on Nabatea was unanimous. They were to be made an example of. With an initial battle setting them on the back foot, we were poised to resume hostilities on a wider front. It was also decided that the jaws of Jerusalem, led by our very own king Antiochus I, would be sent towards Pontus. So they began their long sail from Alexandria north. The king was keen to keep his council happy, although he himself hadn't really bought into the hate of the so-called Pontus. But first, the counter-attack against Nabatea was on. We encircled the city of Petra and ordered our generals to command the assault on our behalf. We massively outnumbered and outclassed the enemy, and it was decided that this would be the best approach. We easily captured the city with low casualties and now found ourselves looking out towards the desert and realising what a daunting task remained. So, with Petra secured, we moved our armies out towards the long desert trails, hoping to act as a defensive line for the city. We knew there were hordes of enemies in the desert. All we could do was replenish, resupply and prepare ourselves. With our forces heading north towards the promised Pontus, discussions had been held with the council, with a split forming between attacking Pergamon and clearing a path, or requesting military access. And as if by fate, a diplomat arrived from Pergamon and requested the very thing. We would counter this deal and demand tribute by Pergamon, and the offer would be accepted. As this deal was locked in, another diplomat arrived, this time from the Medewi, who occupied the southern Nile region of Ethiopia. They came requesting trade and a payment. With our art of the deal, we managed to barter this to something more favourable. While the diplomatic circus continued at our capital, the jaws of Jerusalem arrived at side. They would march to Pontus via land and replenish and recruit en route, while the navy sailed the long way round, hopefully gathering information. In a show of complete and utter desperation, the Nabateans came rushing to us at Petra, begging for peace. It was swiftly rejected, reminding them of their previous aggressions from a time when we were under threat. The second the diplomats disappeared, a Nabatean army attacked one of our border garrisons near Petra. We, for a change, were slightly outnumbered, and the enemy had large swathes of their feared camel riders. With this in mind, we decided to deploy in depth rather than length, using our limited skirmishers to try and keep the enemy cavalry at bay. We had the advantage of defending, and were well located to maintain our position. Supplied by Petra, and the enemy unable to flank, they had to defeat us or retreat from the field. And so the two lines drew closer together, with the inevitable clash of the fronts drawing imminent. But the first action saw the enemy's camel units charge our flanks, and a hope to draw infantry away from our centre. Sarissa Lancer versus Camel Warrior. This would be the true decider of the battle. They're done. With the battle for the flanks underway, the lines clashed. On the right, the enemy's skirmish cavalry and our range units engaged one another. We were outnumbered, and it was only going to be a matter of time until they gave way. We committed to the left flank and decided the plan was to win that with repeated cavalry and elephant charges while trying to maintain composure on the right. And so, the command of this army, which had fell to a member of the Macedonian nobility, brought out the trusted hammer and anvil method. Only, part of this anvil was double reinforced with elephants. With the anvil being smashed repeatedly, the enemy's left flank quickly began crumbling. We had the initiative there, but our right had begun faltering. With the success rippling through from the left for us, and from the right for the enemy, the decision was made to redeploy some of our forces from the left to the right, in the form of 2 units of hoplites. Time had to be bought for our cavalry. And time was bought, but it was at a cost. Large portions of our infantry and skirmishers had been killed or routed. What remained had to hold the enemy in position until our cavalry units could smash their way around. That's when the cries of panic began echoing through the enemy's lines. Full units of men started fleeing, and in the blink of an eye, the enemy's cohesion was lost. The enemy then started fleeing in massive disorganised lines into the desert. In the aftermath of this costly victory, we had to seize the initiative and not allow our enemies time to regroup. We pressed on towards Hegra. The settlement, hearing what had just happened to their king's main army, bent the knee and submitted to our command after a small skirmish with a local garrison. With events against Nabatea coming to a close for now, the combined armies and fleets in the north closed in on Pontus, which to the disappointment of the council was controlled by Sinope, the continued existence of Pontus being misinformation. With a stranglehold in place around the town, our king ordered the attack. We deployed ourselves near our reinforcements and used our cavalry to dispatch of the enemy's incoming ships. Let's just make an example out of them. Yeah, they're done already. We would combine our armies and engage the enemy's forces while our marines landed in the town and attempted to seize control of the square. Our king, Antiochus I, had not realised just how thrown together the army under his command was, with only 2 units of Seleucid hoplites remaining from the Egyptian campaign. While the skirmish battle began and our front lines closed the gap, our marines quietly started landing in the town and made their way unchallenged towards the town square. The main battle then kicked up a notch. We realised we did not have the quality of troops we normally fielded, and that a prolonged melee would not suit us. We attempted to hit and run with our cavalry as often as possible, but it was a true war of attrition, and the enemies were slowly winning. To make things worse, there was still a trickle of enemy forces slowly streaming out of the town, so we were unable to fully enclose the enemy's line without our own men risking being rear charged. Then, a small glimmer of hope appeared. Our marines, led by our distant family member, began capturing the town square, throwing down the enemy standard and replacing it with our own. The decision was then made to set up a defensive position and fortify the town square. And just as the orders were being issued, our second-in-command general, the experienced Sio Mendes, was stricken down. Hold till we get more boys there. Oh shit. Sending a morale shock for our own men. Most of our standing army began faltering, and only expert horsemanship saw our king reform what forces he had left in the town square. The attackers were about to become the defenders. With the enemy's home now our last stand, precision would have to be exercised in every aspect. We had to suck the enemy forces into the tight narrow streets and then attempt to encircle them, causing a panic. We were too outnumbered for a prolonged melee. The Marines were some of the most elite forces at our disposal, but unfortunately they were not numerous. Then came the inevitable mass of enemies, running at us with no real cohesion. None of the enemy commanders from the offset of the battle remained alive. Our fire arrows rained in before they could reach us, as well as the last of our marines' projectiles. These warriors would have to brace and hold while our remaining cavalry and levy units completed their flank. Then the signal was given. Every marine simultaneously charged at the enemy, while the levies charged them from the flank, while the remaining cavalry stood guard at the rear in case of any attempts to flank. However, the enemy, wise to our flanking attempt, countercharged. It was make or break time. Our last volley of fire arrows echoed out at the same time as our final cavalry charge. As if someone had flicked a switch, the conga line of defeat began. The enemy's forces started throwing down their arms and fleeing for their lives. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. Pontus was ours. Antiochus I had survived. Just. He began questioning the council's mottos and what drove them to such reckless hate of Pontus. There was, however, one advantage to this new settlement: increased access to new trading partners, which we immediately began cultivating. Whilst the turmoil of the north came to a calm, the situation in Nabatea came to a head. We had cornered a number of the Nabatian armies in their new makeshift capital, Adamantu. This was a massive opportunity to end the threat and get revenge for their previous aggressions. We had 2 of our armies here being fielded against the last remnants of our old enemy. We had a scrambled start and tried our utmost to form a cohesive line, but the enemy struck before we could solidify. This was going to be a messy affair. Before we could even choose which units should be located where, the entire front lines clashed. 3 armies on the enemy's side and 2 armies on ours. We managed to move some of our levy units to our left flank, where we coupled them with our cavalry and began attempting to encircle some of the enemy's frontline infantry, which was incredibly successful. The nature of the enemy's army immediately began showing itself. They were scrambled locals given weapons and told to fend for their lives. The second the engagement even looked as if it was not going to go their way, they began fleeing. The majority of the enemy's force, seeing this unfold, joined them. and it did not take long for the flames of the Nabateans to flicker into embers and eventually float away. With the Nabatian nobility slaughtered and their settlements now in our hands, their people and way of life faded into the desert. However, this was not the stability the Arabian Peninsula deserved. The council, not satisfied, began looking to the south, where the remnants of the desert tribes sat on wealth, and would be a constant threat with their alliance system that bound most of them together. As we poised for our next move, we realised that we were not involved in a large-scale conflict for the first time since we took control of the Seleucids. However, we had an idea of what our next tasks would be. With episode 4 drawing to a close, you can see we have made substantial territorial expansion with Pontus in the north and the deep deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. This unlocked a number of new resources for us, meaning our trade income should further increase. We do however have some rising threats in both Pergamon to the north and possibly in the form of our satrapies. Most of the united wars we were in together have come to a close. Council has suggested we place a few armies in our eastern reaches to act as a patrol in case of any troubles. Thank you once again for stopping by. We stream these playthroughs on my Twitch channel, which is linked below, every Monday at 8 PM BST until late in the evening, as well as a variety of other strategy games with the odd sprinkling of variety in there. If you enjoyed what you've seen, a sub is always appreciated, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.